Folks will hop in and join us. Thanks, Marshall, for setting up the record. So just to kind of preface what we're up to today, this is really geared towards families where students are already registered with us. We have another presentation that we do for families who want to learn more about the very early part of the relationship with our office. So just wanted to make sure that those that are here for, the right place, but you're welcome to stay even if you're not.
Yeah. And as Jody said, this session is being recorded, so just please use the chat for questions. We do have some time built in for questions today, so we might not be answering during the presentation itself, but we certainly have some built-in times to talk. And please don't share any personal information, even if you're using the chat. We just like to keep things confidential because we do post these recordings as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No.
It is on it. Here,
Okay.
I'll do this.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. All right.
So I'm just going to run through our agenda really quick. So we'll start with some introductions. So I'll start with myself. I'm Lauren Tornatori. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Disability Education and Enhancement here at UMass Lowell. My background is as a school psychologist, and I've worked at the university for 10 years.
And hi, I'm Jody Rachens. I'm the director here of Disability Services. I've been here for 4.5 years, and I've been in the higher ed disability realm as well as K to 12 for a total of a little over 20 years. And so, yeah, it's nice to see you all tonight.
The other parts of our agenda, we're going to get into a little bit about why we're here, why we really decided to do this presentation, then digging into communication and providing support behind the scenes, and then finally we will have some time for open discussion. In terms of why we're here today, or kind of why we decided to do this presentation, I think one main thing is, we do feel that we have an aligned goal to help your student become a productive member of society, to really help them grow into being an adult. And we know that difficult situations or challenging things will happen throughout a person's lifetime, and college is that really soft place for someone to land and to practice those skills before they get out into the quote-unquote real world.
Yeah, and also thinking about that there's been these major societal shifts in sort of helping students, and we're going to talk through some of those societal shifts as we go along. Let's be frank, we're in society, we're sort of in constantly difficult times, and everything's very fluid, and we have this... Sometimes we have this knee-jerk, and we have this as well as families, as well as people all over the university, have this knee-jerk instinct to just help and just to pitch in, and thinking and recognizing about whether that is sort of working, or is there a different way that our instincts can kind of come into play to help and assist moving more into that productive member of society goal. So we do feel like, thinking about, how we all collectively will support students, and that we all collectively need to kind of maybe recalibrate how we're thinking about this idea that, okay, it's going to take a little longer for adulthood, but that they, we got to get there. So how should we do that? And also just thinking about how the support style does need to change, that we really do need to let the student learn to be the driver. And it's a progression, but, thinking about all those pieces. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, this idea of, if we remove the struggle from the student, we want to help. Listen, it happens all the time. It happens to us. We'll have a student who tells me something, and I'm like, let me email your faculty member and see what I can do about it, and that's what I want to do. I want to make them feel better, and they've got emotions and they've got feelings, but I've recognized recently that I maybe need to be careful on that, because then I'm not giving the student the opportunity to kind of practice some of those skills themselves in a more supported way. So I want to read to you a quote from an article that we have later in our references section. So parents today the truth is they're living through an age of anxiety, climate instability, social division, a youth mental health crisis, and the relentless uncertainty of AI's advance. So it makes sense that we want to soften the blows for our children. We want them safe, we want them protected, we want them shielded from the scarier edges of life, and we want them to feel confident and smart. But, same author, remove the struggle and you remove the growth. When parents or schools smooth obstacles away, we're unintentionally, really, really unintentionally creating long-term deficits. Because mistakes are really the biggest areas where humans can learn and grow. So what we're going to talk about a little bit more today is sort of shifting collectively as we work on this journey together, is moving from the student feeling like or someone saying, oh, you can't do that, to well, I think you can, and the student thinks I can. It's going to be hard. I might not come out the way I want to, but I do think I can. And kind of moving into that shift away from the I can't, because the I can't is just helpless, and it's not actually going to help that productive member of society in the future. And we do want that soft opportunity for them to grow. So I'm going to talk about sort of my favorite term, my favorite buzzword, and that is anti-fragility. So if I back up a little bit, so you can see on the screen there's a picture of glass, broken glass, and that is something that's fragile. So something that's fragile, it breaks under pressure, it never entirely recovers. You might be able to kind of put it back together, but it's going to get worse if it breaks again. And then we talk a lot, and a lot that's been going on sort of in higher education talk, probably even in high school talk, is this idea of students getting resiliency and getting resilient. The thing about resiliency is that things don't get worse like a rubber basketball, but it just kind of absorbs it and stays the same. It doesn't get better. This concept of anti-fragility is something that improves when exposed to stress, volatility, or uncertainty. And so this is a quote from the man who coined anti-fragility. His name is Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he's a philosopher, and he really kind of wrote about systems in businesses, and then it sort of moved through, if you've heard of Jonathan Haidt and the anxious generation, and some of the work he's done, this is sort of now being taken into sort of our young adults and our youth. But the idea is, so some things actually benefits from shocks. Like you can see in this picture, the muscle system. You have to stress your muscle system to get stronger. An immune system needs to go through some basic, illnesses in young childhood in order to be able to fight off some bigger and greater things later. So they thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, in randomness, disorder, and stressors. They love adventure, and they risk and uncertainty. Yet, in spite of the ubiquity of the phenomenon, there's no word for the exact opposite of fragile. Let us call it anti-fragile. So anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same, but the anti-fragile gets better. So that's sort of what a mindset that we've really taken on in our office, and a way that we're really using as a lens to see students. So we wanted to kind of introduce this and unpack this a little bit with you today.
So, looking again, Jody's talking a little bit about the lens that we're taking our work from, but we also have to acknowledge that there's been some major shifts in society, even since when we've been in college. And one of them would be this idea of frictionless society or frictionless life. It typically refers to our digital lives. So, being able to have things at the tip of our fingers. If I want something, I can even customize it and have it within 24 hours if I wanted it, which is not the way most of us really grew up, but is certainly what we're used to at this point. And although some of that has brought really great conveniences to our lives, it also has undermined our ability to grow as adults. So as we're moving through life and things are becoming more frictionless, or more behind a screen, easy to manage through an app or through just a click, we're really getting we're really degrading our ability to develop certain skills that we need as an adult. One would be patience, right? So as I mentioned, you can just click on something and receive it immediately and have it be customized. I don't have to wait anymore. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm shopping online, I leave the window open where it is until I get that email. And God, sometimes 30 seconds to get that email feels like 30 minutes to know that my order has been received or will be coming to me. It also, our ability to communicate or negotiate with other people has changed due to this. Now we're starting to get used to having chat bots where we can just say something, and usually the chat bot is going to say, oh, well, of course, even though the window has passed, you can return it. Or of course, these other things are going to happen. So when we do sometimes come up against something where we need to kind of negotiate or talk a little bit more, students aren't used to doing that as much. They're kind of used to things being more transactional or one way. It does also erode our ability to develop critical thinking skills. So as we're getting used to everything being online and being able to kind of find it at our fingertips, we're not as trained or ingrained to research a little bit more or to look into issues more deeply to be able to find something. We end up getting more frustrated sometimes if we can't find an answer within seconds. Also, our deeper personal connections have taken a hit as our lives have become more frictionless. I think about growing up, and I would often order things from the same pizza shop, and I would know who the people are, or they would kind of know my order. Now I can just order online, and the bag, it just has my receipt stapled to it, and I walk in and don't really interact with anyone. And that does kind of erode again at our ability to communicate. And then finally, in this frictionless world, we are having less of a tolerance of accepting the word no. Again, we're used to, being able to skirt around things, or that it's no until I make it be yes. And so, again, our frustration ends up coming up. And this can happen a lot for students, especially as they come into the college level, and there may be heightened standards on them where they're not used to being able to, turn things in when they want to, or, get a pass and redo things. So that acceptance of no is really reducing. The other thing I'll also point out is, certainly some of these apps have taken away some of the friction that we might feel in life, but also, as Jody mentioned, we do it sometimes too as adults around them. We want to help, and so sometimes we're jumping in a little too early to solve a problem for someone rather than working through that problem-solving process themselves. And as we do that, if we keep taking on life's little inconveniences for someone, we're going to further delay these skills that we expect them to develop in adulthood. So thinking about all of those things, we do acknowledge that there has been an adjusted role for support people over time, whether that's us in a professional realm or certainly, parents and family members. We know that there's been a shift in family dynamics over the last decade, where students are choosing to live at home more or be closer to home. They're not going out and leaving to go to the quote unquote big city or another state in order to get their education. They're staying closer. And so there is, just by nature of proximity, more of an interaction between a student and their parent than what might have been in the past. In addition, we've all started using what we would call learning management systems, or LMSs, like Google Classroom, for example, that can actually go through and text parents and tell them, your student hasn't handed this in, or they need to do this assignment, and don't forget this. And then that makes us all feel like we have to be in charge of having the student turn something in or do something, when really we need to be letting go of those things a little bit and having them do it more independently. We also know that a student having a disability adds another layer of complication. Oftentimes at the high school level, there are a lot more supports than there would be potentially at the college level. There's more people at the high school level to kind of tell a student and guide them through their academic day, where then it becomes more on them to do it independently. And we know that sometimes with students having a disability at the high school level, a guidance counselor or a special education teacher might be filling those gaps as well. But that really should give us more motivation to want to teach our students to be independent and develop these communication skills, because it's critical for them to have it in their life beyond campus. And finally, we just want to acknowledge this is going to be hard for everyone. Jody mentioned it was hard for us to take a step back and think about how we can support students in a different way so that we can make sure that they're developing into adulthood. And we know it can be difficult for other people on this Zoom meeting today as well.
So the metaphor that I think that that Lauren and I gravitated towards is sort of this idea of us all becoming the guardrails rather than the driver or even like the passenger in the seat. So you can see there's a picture of a girl who's really proud that she got her license. But if you think about learning to drive, it is a progression. It really is. It goes from being in an empty parking lot with doing very minimal things to learning the road, some of the pieces like that. So I want to quote, I know I've got a lot of quotes, I'm sorry, but I want to quote Julie Lythcott-Hames, who wrote this really cool book, it's in our references, called How to Raise an Adult. And she was in an article, and she wrote something that concerned me when I read it. And it said, you're effectively occupying the student's lane and pushing the student out of it. Am I depriving them of having those very experiences because I'm so afraid they're so incapable that I'm choosing to do it all for them? Having that kind of over and over again might be the internal message that a student is receiving. And like Lauren said and I said, we're not just saying from families and parents, we're saying from everybody who's looking to help, and to help because things are especially hard. But the parents' role, and I'm going to expand this to the support people's role, is we love you, we believe in you, you can tell us anything, we're a sounding board. If you want advice, we're happy to give it, but we're not going to impose our advice without you asking. We're not going to swoop in and solve it because we know you got this. That's just a shift in sort of how that internal message would go. It's like, we're here, we're super here, we're those guardrails, we're going to catch you, but, you're not going to fall off that cliff, but you got this, and I believe you can do it. Okay, but yeah, that's like easier said than done, right? And so, what Lauren and I've spent some time gathering some information on is sort of, okay, well, what does it mean to become the guardrails rather than the driver, right? So some of the kind of handy tips that we think could help people to think about is the first one is, as a support person who's most likely the one that's receiving the kind of emotional feeling from the students on the other side, is thinking about whether there's help in reiterating campus messaging and that there probably was campus messaging rather than seeing if things should be overridden and rules can be overridden. And thinking to yourself, as we've said, that college is this soft landing. Like there's even failing one class, even failing all your classes, like there are so many safety nets in place to help a student pick themselves up and move forward and get back together. So truly, what is the worst case this consequence will bring? And I know a loss of time, a loss of money, those kind of things, but what is really the worst case consequence there? Then thinking about the big picture, the long-term plan here of helping the student realize, what the rules and what the messages are and what that means. But what would be the best case scenario here? Another idea is this idea of leading from trust and curiosity rather than anger, distrust in the campus. And I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, we have a wonderful campus here where people are always collaborating, but sometimes we need to remind people and people need to remind us that, any kind of us versus them, like if we come on and are like, well, the student told us that you said all these things, that we're creating this like defensiveness and this us versus them mentality, and people are going to kind of immediately feel sort of attacked and those kind of things. Whereas if we came on and said, hey, I was talking with the student and, I was just curious if like we could fill in some more information, and leading with this idea that people probably are there to help and well-intentioned, like we're not in it for the money here. Let's be honest on that one, right? So, and the idea of modeling that for the student is really, really powerful, of leading from that idea of curiosity and gaining more information than sort of that anger and that distrust. One thing to think about in sort of this progression from being the guardrails as opposed to like being the driver of the car is thinking about, well, even in driver's ed, the student has to do student driving with the expert, but a trusted person in the car, and no, only other student drivers are sitting in the back seat here, and they got to learn and they got to work this out, and safety wise, we got to entrust the students to be in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing, and then processing it with them after, how'd it go, that kind of thing. Another idea that is something that Lauren and I have really been working on, and our team's been working on with students, is when a student comes to us with a problem, and we'll have several types of problems that we'll go through today, but instead of just coming up with solutions and so forth, which is honest to God our knee-jerk. Lauren and I both have these counseling backgrounds where we really had to sit there and not really give solutions, and then we got into this business because we really like the action of like solving and moving forward with students. But coming to a middle place on that one and saying to the student, like, do you have any thoughts on like what you might do next, or what do you want to do next, or even as simple as like, we'll do this, like, let me Google this for you, let me find the tutoring center information for you, and I'll get the link for you, and I'm gonna pull it up, and then I'm gonna show you. Even starting with that and being like, hey, do you think that maybe there's a website about the tutoring center? Do you think that that's something you might want to look into? Or even asking them, this is so human nature, is like, we're all so much better at giving advice to other people than we are to ourselves, right? So even asking a student, like, well, if a friend came to you with that same problem about their roommate, like, what kind of thoughts would you have for them? And get those critical thinking, those wheels spinning with the student, because they may have quite a bit of knowledge that they're just not used to tapping into because other people are jumping in with that knee-jerk kind of thing. So we need to kind of build that muscle back of that critical thinking and problem solving of, I might have a solution sneaky in there somewhere. The other thing is so this goes in that, like, we all have that immediacy effect in the, that digital frictionless life that we've all got in. And so this immediacy of making it better and not being able to sit in feelings that don't feel good. Sitting in discomfort actually, and if you read the Anti-Fragility book, like, sitting in those times of reflection is actually where some of the most brilliant ideas of companies actually came out of, and kind of sitting in there and letting it digest and mulling it over rather than just like really quick action. And so, that's something that we all need to model helping with students, even though they just want to feel better, and we want them to feel better too. But is that also taking away some of the skills that are going to help them down the line? Just a couple of other things in here. So we get a lot from the students, and you probably hear it even more than we do. But my professor didn't get back to me, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, when did you write to them? Well, at 10 o'clock last night. Well, it's 9 a.m. today. They might have an 8 a.m. class that they're teaching. So let's see if we can, give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not just ignoring you, and that, and so setting some clearer goals of sort of like what, timing might look like there, and encouraging students to actually leave a message or an email. And this is across the board. We were hearing even from faculty that they don't like leaving voicemails if we don't pick up the phone immediately. And we have one person who answers our phone. So if that person is in the bathroom or on the phone, it might go to voicemail, and then they don't leave a voicemail, and then we don't know what they want or need. And so leave a message. We are happy to get back to people, and leaving a message gives everybody time to sort of digest. Oh, let me see if I can look that thing up before I get back to that person, because often that's what we want to do too. We want to look up and get, like, what do we know about the student situation already before we get into it. So having that time helps everybody process a little bit. And as all support people, I think students get those, their frontal lobes are just not fully developed yet, at the late teens, early 20s. And so that urgency feeling of what an emergency is or isn't, that can feel really overwhelming to them. And we all need to model sort of, I know it feels like an emergency. I know it feels urgent, but if everything's an emergency, then we have kind of a boy who cried wolf situation, and then it diffuses when something is, we can't really get between what's truly an emergency and what is sitting with something that doesn't feel great. And so by doing that, thinking about, separating emotions from the fact and the reality, because we're like Lauren said, like so much of this things that are happening with all of us right now is we're so emotion heavy. We're just, our reactions are so big. My internet went out on Saturday night, and I spent an hour and a half on the phone with Verizon, and I was like really quelling my emotions because I was like, this is kind of ridiculous. Like, why can't they just repower it up? Like, what is going on here? And I really had to pull my emotion down, and that's something we want to model for people who maybe don't have those skills themselves yet. So keeping in mind, those first reactions, those are often going to be negative, defensive, afraid, apprehensive. I had a student I met with the other day who's in a college writing class and was like, I don't know if I like this instructor. I don't know if I might switch because I had to write a Blackboard post and the instructor gave me feedback, and that's kind of ridiculous. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And it was like, well, I think I'm a pretty good writer, and I don't know why the instructor was criticizing me. And I was like, well, what do you think like the point and goal of the college writing class is? And it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess to like be a better writer. And I was like, well, do you think like perhaps that's the instructor's like job to perhaps give you feedback so that you have the opportunity to take it in and become a better writer? And the student was like, I guess so. We weren't 100% there yet, but at least we dropped some of that emotion, right? And when students come to tell us things, and we encourage when they tell you, we just know this in life, and we're adults and we know this, is that, usually there's more to a story than one person. One person is telling their version, their side. We're all tailoring our story a little bit, consciously or unconsciously, to get the person to feel what we're feeling. We want the other people to feel what we're feeling. So we might, there probably is more to something. So, when a student will say like, well, my instructor told me that I just couldn't pass that thing in. And it took, it's only like 2 days late, and I don't know why they just like won't accept it. And I can't believe it, and my first instinct is like, yeah, that sounds kind of ridiculous. Like only 2 days. Like, I mean, yeah, of course, like it stinks that you're late and they, you shouldn't really do that. But, I don't know. And, and then if we call the instructor, there's a lot more to the pieces in the story, and maybe the student missed like a peer review with their, with their peers, and so their peer that they were partnered up with like didn't get to do work that day because they didn't bring their stuff with them, and there's more there. What's really helpful too is for students to hear times where we were vulnerable and we came out through the other side, and where we struggled, and help them feel like they're not alone out there. I think that's one of the number one things I think we hear when we just see students all day long, is they all think their situation is novel and brand new. And it's not that it isn't, because everything's unique and everybody's unique, but a lot of the stuff that college students are going through, these are the things that college students have going through as long as time. I didn't like my freshman year roommate, 25 years ago, and people don't like their freshman year roommates right now, and so, I think that that's something that's helpful to kind of validate, and thinking of, things students maybe don't want to do. Maybe they don't want to confront somebody or ask a question or ask for help on something, what seems scary at first. Once they kind of get started, can get easier. So, thinking about, is that a place where we can help, or we can start this together or alongside with them? Is like, I'm just going to sit here and you can start writing that email. I'll just be here while you do it. And yeah, you can ask me like, does this sound good? Those kind of things. So those are some of the ideas initially. Okay. So we just talked for a whole lot of time, and we have this cute little picture of this guy who's just fixing those guardrails, those messed up guardrails. He's putting them back together so we can all be safe again, and wanted to see, at this point, I know we ended up having a small crowd. I swear we were supposed to have 17 people, so, life happens, and hopefully we'll catch them at the next one. But does anybody have any questions at this point from sort of all the stuff we just blathered at all of you, we can open it up. I can stop sharing for a minute.
Okay, so our next section kind of gets into communication a little bit. Just a couple things to acknowledge. We know that students in college are starting to become more independent. Communication with family or support people may change as a result. This is a normal part of growing up. We know some students may not be as forthcoming, whereas others may communicate more. There's really no perfect amount of communication. We just want to think about, or at least start thinking about, how we can be supportive without inhibiting that student's development of independence and really their own voice and communication style. Before I get into a little bit more about types of communication and ways that you can support students, I do just want to do a quick reminder. The next part that I'm getting into about communication, I'm really talking about students who have those everyday struggles, the roommate issues. I disagree with a professor, or, something is difficult, or I'm overwhelmed, those types of things. If you ever have an instance where you are very concerned about the health and safety of a student, if you feel they are in immediate threat of danger or harm, I will put into the chat, we do have resources for UMass Lowell Police, as well as what would be called a STARS report. STARS is the Students at Risk team, and they do have some case managers who meet weekly to go over those cases, to have someone assigned to that student to reach out and provide resources. So we are getting those things into the chat, but I always just want to be transparent about that so that we're not getting into a conversation about somebody who may be having like a true crisis. So getting into a little bit more about communication. So first I have one end of the spectrum, which is students who share too little. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, this can sometimes be just a natural part of growing up. I know for me, as I went away to college, I certainly wasn't looping my parents in as much. I was really trying to rely more on my friends around me and the new connections that I was making. So I know sometimes it can be difficult if you're having that daily connection to then not have as much, but just know that just is a natural sign of growing up. I think sometimes an important question, and something that sometimes I ask myself as well, is, if I want to know something, why do I need to know this information? Is it to satisfy a curiosity that I have, or is it for something critical like paying a bill? Something critical like paying a bill is, you might need a student ID number or something like that. There's information there. But, a student might choose, again, to withhold things from you. And again, that's just a natural part of growing up. If you're really concerned about a student, they're really not sharing anything at all, and you feel completely out of the loop, one suggestion that I have is to try to set up a time to talk regularly. And it can be something that you both can agree on, a time that you're both available, whether that's over the phone or if you wanted to do like a Zoom chat or something over text. But really important to, first of all, let the student take the lead in those conversations. Remembering, and again, I have to remind myself this too, it's not an interrogation, right? Or this isn't like I'm coming at you with all the questions that I have and I expect to get full answers to my satisfaction. Really letting the student take the lead about how things are going and updating you. For some people, it can be helpful to text them topics ahead of time about like, hey, I'd really like to hear more about your roommates, or I'd love to hear about if you're joining any clubs, or if you could just give me a brief update on how your classes are going. For many students that we work with, especially ones that have anxiety, they can find it really comforting to know what we're going to talk about ahead of time. That way they can be prepared and feel like they can provide you with a fuller answer. And then finally, just remembering to ask open-ended questions. So if I ask something as a yes or no, that it really does like kind of quash conversation and lead to a lot of awkward silences. So really thinking about how you can ask a question to be a little bit more open. So for example, asking, tell me a little bit more about your roommates, instead of, well, is your roommate nice? Or are you friends with your roommate? Are you making friends? You know, that kind of yes or no thing versus those open-ended, tell me about this, or tell me more about that, or I'm interested to learn about, you know, X, Y, and Z. Sometimes a great way to start a conversation with a student is to ask them about how their classes are going in their major, what they're interested in, and what they really like, and you'll usually get a lot more information. And then finally, especially for students who communicate too little, and I say this because I've definitely seen it over the years, please try to remember to rely on the student themselves for information. I know many times students may have a high school friend that they came to UMass Lowell with, or somebody else that they know, or you may know someone who works here. You really should be relying on the student directly for that information rather than playing kind of that game of telephone and, you know, relying on someone else who is likely going to give you inaccurate information. And I think the other thing is too, if a student finds out that, like, you know, for example, if I were going around and talking to all their professors about them and they didn't know that, the student's going to start to feel like they're being kind of surveilled, and, you know, they might start hiding information more because of that, or coming at you from a place of distrust. So I know, again, it can be difficult when students aren't sharing as much, but these are just some quick tips to kind of get you back on track. On the very other end of the spectrum, we have students who share a lot, and we definitely work with a lot of students who share a lot of information. I have some students who, at times where they're really stressed, might text me, like, or not text, but it feels like a text. They'll email me like every minute with every thought that's coming into their head about a meeting that we might have coming up, and sometimes that can be overwhelming to see. And so, you know, if you have a student who's calling you a lot or texting you a lot and giving you all those updates, I think sometimes it's important to ask, you know, are you getting in touch with me just to vent? Or do you need to get advice? Or do you need active help, right? Because those are three very different things. You know, sometimes, as Jody was mentioning earlier, a student may come to you with things and they're really just coming to you with feelings. They just want to kind of dump it out. And then, you know, certainly we've done it too. You kind of jump in to do something for them or give them advice. And sometimes that actually has the opposite effect, where it can start to shut the student down because they feel like they're not being heard. It's more that they're just being told what to do. So just asking that sometimes can be helpful, and also help frame us in terms of what they're wanting from us in that moment. If a student says they want active help, consider what that might look like. And I do have a little bit more on the next slide, but just some questions to ask yourself in the meantime is, you know, is this something I should be doing for them, or can I assist in some way? You know, again, who is the driver here in this situation? So how can I sit beside them rather than taking over? Should I wait until the student is in a calmer or more stable state before assisting? You know, sometimes, again, we're being contacted when somebody's experiencing really big feelings, and they might not even be in the right headspace to take the advice or information that you're giving them. So you might need some time to calm down first. And then a good rule of thumb sometimes is to ask yourself, you know, if a student wants active help, when you're considering what that's going to look like, consider, would you do this for someone else? You know, would you do this for someone else's child that you know? If you wouldn't do it for them, it might not be appropriate to do it for your own student, even though, again, we may feel like we know the answer. Or sometimes it's good to kind of use that as a guidepost. And then finally, setting boundaries can be okay too, you know, especially for someone who's getting text messages all throughout the day and you're not sure what to do with it. It's okay to acknowledge to that student that getting a constant text or calls may be stressful for you as well. And it may put you in a situation where you feel like you must jump in and help, or think that it's an emergency when really they're just dumping feelings. So it is good to have that conversation with a student if you feel like you're getting overwhelmed by the amount of communication that you're receiving. So a student has shared that they need or want active help. Now, what are we going to do, right? Again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, you know, really looking at what level of support you're going to provide and try to default to the one that's the most hands-off. As Jody mentioned earlier, you may want to offer to help find a campus connection for them. Anything at the university, you know, and I've been here a long time, and I still go onto Google and type in uml.edu and then the thing that I want, and I would say almost 100% 100% of the time, it brings me right to that website that has the information that I need, as well as contact information. We can't all memorize every policy and procedure here in the campus. So it can be a good starting point if a student's like, well, I just don't know where to go. Well, I know somebody said something about immunizations, but I don't know what that means. Okay, uml.edu immunizations, there's a whole page about that we can start looking through and diving into. Also, maybe offering to help draft an email to a resource or practice what they might say. ChatGPT can certainly assist with this to help you say, well, I'm going into this meeting and I want to talk about these things. How can I approach this? A student can use ChatGPT to help with that. And I do have a handout also that we'll send along with these slides that have very basic starters for emails for common issues that come up for students. Another thing to think about is just reminding the student, as Jody mentioned earlier, to maintain a reasonable expectation for a response. I usually tell a student 2 business days. I feel like if I don't hear back from someone in 2 business days, then I would maybe reach out again or say, hey, just following up on that email. But again, I think sometimes they expect us to respond immediately. So, getting into a little bit more about practicing meetings and calls, because we know sometimes a student may have an issue and it's not going to just be resolved by sending an email. They might need to call someone, they might need to have a meeting about it. So, ways that you can kind of sit beside a student to help them will be doing things like helping them create a short list of talking points or questions that they have to make sure that they're going into the meeting prepared for what they want to talk about. Also, clarifying what goals they have. What do they hope to gain out of this meeting? What are they hoping to get? And maybe doing a little check-in on whether that's realistic, I know sometimes I talk to students as one example of like, well, I want to join 10 clubs and I want to be, president of 2 of them in a year or something. That's great, but is that really a reasonable goal for what their social calendar should look like? So kind of talking a little bit about that. Also having them practice the conversation with you and giving constructive feedback. I'll use the example of like when there's a roommate issue sometimes and there's miscommunications. I might ask a student about, well, can you tell me what that looks like for you? So that then I can start walking through with them. And I'll be honest about, hey, I'm really confused by this part that you said here. Or, well, wait, what happened first? Did they say something first? Or did you say something first? Or was there a text message? Again, sometimes having emotions be really high makes it difficult for us to communicate effectively. So it can be good to practice that, whether it's with you or again, using ChatGPT. Also, helping them choose a private, calm location to have this conversation. I can't tell you how many times a student is calling and they're on speakerphone and they're on the shuttle. I can't hear anything that they're saying. It's really difficult. And then, I'm saying, I can't hear you. Can you repeat that? And they're getting frustrated. Making sure that they're in a good place to have that conversation, because especially when emotions are high or maybe they're nervous about something, being asked to repeat it 3 or 4 times is certainly not going to help the emotional state that they're in. And then I'll just, hammer home, please help them practice leaving a voicemail because they're not used to doing it and they don't leave their name or phone number, and we just need that. So I'll hand it back over to Jody.
Okay, we're at the tail end here. So just a couple of reminders that we all need and that we have to remind each other all the time too is, okay, making changes. Is this going to be uncomfortable for all of us? Yep. Is it going to go well every time? No. Is it going to be easy? No. Are we all going to stumble sometimes and insert ourselves because that's what we're used to doing? Yeah, of course. But do we all know that long-term goal, that idea of who we want our young adults to be soon, is it going to happen time and time again where they're going to face discomfort and we're going to face discomfort? I have a typo there. And we need to work through it. So, yes. Okay, so kind of like bringing this all back together before we come back together again. So goals. We collectively, working together with you all, want to help them become productive members of society. That's everybody's goal, right? And so helping your student collect that I and you can data really more often so it can override that initial instinct of like, I can't give a presentation. I just can't. I can't do it. Well, okay, let's see if we can think about that a little bit more. And us being that model for the students to develop those skills, all of us, helping model that mindset that's our goal for them. And we're not doing this for them because we don't care. It's actually maybe even more care. And then again, finally, just being the guardrail. That's equally, if not more important than being the driver. If you're the driver, you know you're probably not going to drive off a cliff. But guess what? They're going to be out there. And if you could save them from driving off a cliff, they might bust up their car a little bit, get a bruise, hopefully not more than that, but like they aren't going to drive right off that cliff. So you're there as a sounding board and all those things. So that's pretty much the end of what we were going to share with you all today. We do have this like long, extensive page of sort of a lot of the reading and the things that we've been doing. And so in case anybody like loves what we have to say and loves this